And dear Craig,
This meeting is being recorded.
over to you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Andre. Thank you all for joining this afternoon, this evening, this morning, whatever it might be, where you are. Here it's sunny for the first time in several days, so it's really pleasant to look outside and see the sun reflecting off the snow. I'm going to be here for a while. So when Andre asked if I would contribute to the Holy Nights, I more or less said yes right away. And what date? Yeah, what date? Let's see. Then you look at the calendar and all the other things going on, and I just simply said, sort of arbitrarily, December 27th. Didn't really think a whole lot about what I would say or anything. Sometimes you just say yes, and then you see what happens. So then looking at this date, I realized for persons of anthroposophical interest, there are probably two very important figures that have something to do with December 27th. One of them is Marie Steiner, who died on this day in 1948. About, what was she, 83, 84 years old. And the other one is the Evangelist John. And why December 27th became actually my first question is not to ignore Marie Steiner, but that is a figure where I think I need a few more years before I can speak about her in public. Whereas John, the Evangelist, has been one of my major heroes and one of my major guiding lights for about 50 years, more or less. So I think after a while, I can kind of depend on John to give me inspiration and give me inspiration that I can also share with other people. So that's what I'm going to try to do. And then at some point, of course, Andre begins to ask, well, we need a title. And the title that I came up with, I think, is one of those things that you could write a 1,000-page, highly quoted, scientifically founded study. We are, I am, and the new we are. I would call it Studies in the History of the Consciousness of the Human Being, something like that. And that is a topic that has a lot to do with John. John to do with that topic. And the more than one John play a pretty significant role. I'm going to start with John the Evangelist, and let's see how far we get. Oh, there's the time. I want to read you a poem by Wendell Berry, one of our American poets from the 20th century, 21st century, who often writes about simple things and can make you think very deeply about complicated things by speaking. Here we go. The path I follow, I could hardly see. It is so faintly trod and overgrown. At times, looking, I fail to find it among dark trunks, leaves, living and dead. And then I am alone, the woods shapeless around me. I look away, my gaze at rest among leaves, and then I see the path again, a dark way on through the light. Artist Wendell Berry takes this image of the path, which for me is always very appropriate when you start to one of these figures like John. Because you could just say, well, he's been so long and there's so much written about him. There are so many paintings painted and statues made and other beautiful things. He just is. John is. And that would be the biggest mistake, to think that John is. He is, of course. He has been, he was, he is. But to say, how can he inspire us to move ahead day by day? That's my question. Go through this dark, the path is sometimes overgrown, sometimes you can't find it. And then suddenly you see it again, this well-trod path through the light. Isn't that an amazing picture? Path through the light. So maybe introduction. We ask ourselves, who is this John? What did he create for the world? He's left a lot behind. And just a couple of words from Rudolf Steiner to begin with, from a lecture in 1906. It's in Collected Works 94 in German, February 19th, 1906. Calls the first words of the John Gospel that most of us know so well. In the beginning was the Word was turned towards God. He calls that John's own formula for meditation, which led his soul to spiritual perception, sets free John's soul, and brings forth great visions. And then he says to his listeners, and I pass this on to you, and I take it as a challenge myself, let the formula work on your soul, and you will verify what is the first chapters, meaning the first chapters of the Gospel of John. Thus it is intended, and thus it should be. It leads into the depths of the inner life of the soul. And if we say anthroposophy wants something, this being, anthroposophia, wants something from you and me, this is what she wants. She wants us to get to work with the things she gives us. Rudolf Steiner was never happy with his followers who simply came to the lectures and then went home and continued as they had been. And just imagine the times that one of his followers came, Dr. Steiner, I've had a real insight. Thank you for all of your work, and I've worked with this or that meditation. That people were actually working with and on the contents that he gave them, such as the prologue to the Gospel, which leads into the depths of the inner life of the soul. Not a profession of faith. Imagine that. Not a profession of faith, but a text that gives strength, self-supporting, independent, higher life. The John Gospel is not only addressed to the human intellect, our soul forces, which real soul experiences bring forth. So, heavy-duty stuff, the Gospel of John. Let's see if we can approach this being, this mysterious one. Whether you read, study theologians of the old school, those who consider themselves to be working scientifically with evidence and texts and comparisons and so on, or whether you work with someone who works more intuitively, John is one of those beings that will always pose different. He isn't Matthew, Mark, or Luke. He's also not Paul. He's not Peter or James or that other John or Matt. He is very much himself, very unique. And takes a unique place in this whole universe of beings around the Christ. People are still writing books about John. They're still writing articles. If you subscribe to one of the anthroposophical periodicals, either US, Canada, from the Goethe Annum, every so often there's going to be another investigation of John, the Gospel of John, the person of John, always wondering, who is this? Who is this being? And the first thing I asked myself was, why December 27th? It seems so arbitrary. And looking more closely at some of the traditions, one finds that the early church set this date as actually the closest to the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, next to the first martyr of the Christian faith, namely Stephen. You can read about in the Acts of the Apostles. The first martyr is celebrated on December 26th, and how shall we say, the first initiate, first and only initiate of Christ, celebrated on the 27th. This nearness, this closeness to Christ was very important in establishing this festival day, proximity. And you think of such pictures, I'll talk about these a little bit more later. You think about such moments as the Last Supper. And imagine these 12 men, maybe more, with Jesus reclining, probably sitting on the ground, half reclining, and John with his ear to the heart of Jesus. It's described at least twice that way in John's gospel. That this particular gospel had, this particular person, had such an access to Jesus Christ that no one else really had. That he could listen, as it were, to the inner workings of Jesus' being. This picture of the disciple resting his ear on the breast, on the heart of Jesus. Hang on to that one for a while. And if we do a bit of a fast forward into the next day, the only one of the disciples who didn't run away was this one who stood under the cross. He doesn't name himself. He stands, witnesses the execution of Jesus, and it is Jesus who then speaks to him, first to his mother, "Behold your son," and then to the beloved disciple, "Behold your mother." The very simple sentence takes place, and he took her from that time into himself, often translated into his home, into his life, all good. But the real deeper meaning there is he took the being of the mother of Jesus into his own being. They became, as it were, one with each other. He's also the last of the disciples, of the apostles, die. John is supposed to have lived to a very old age. Some sources say he was 99 years old. We know that in biblical times, years and dates were not counted quite the way we do. But he became very old. Toward the end of his life, he apparently was only saying one thing, and that would be to look at his followers, his disciples, his friends, his students, and to say, "Children, love one another." And of course, that sounds like something very, of course, love one another. That's the whole message of the John Gospel. And those are perhaps the last words that your soul is able in truth. Children, love each other. Perhaps this is the path toward the new we are. I hope that well. Important to mention the polarity. If we have here December 27th, then we have over here June 24th. That we have in the calendar of the year, in the course of the year, we have the birth of Jesus, the martyrdom of Stephen, and this festival of John the Evangelist.
Greg, you froze on my computer, at least.
Here also.
Yes, I mean, friends, you have same experience like I am, right? So Craig disappeared. So let's wait. Hopefully he will come back. I think it's connection problem. Yeah, thank you, Dominica. So also yes. So it's probably something with Craig's computer. Craig, if you can you hear me? If you hear me, I would suggest just re-enter.
Andre, this is Gina. Craig is trying to reconnect at the moment.
Oh, thank you. Gina, he can also maybe can take your computer. This is exactly what we did last time.
I'm sorry,
mean,
say
if-
that again?
Is it possible? Of course, it's extreme situation, but is it possible he will take your computer to speak?
Okay.
So it will be the best solution. They
Sure.
try to fix old computer.
We will try that. Give us a moment.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Dina, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now. I think the internet connection in his place was down. He's trying it again. I've now come back upstairs to my
Yeah,
internet.
but
If he needs
I
to, he'll
cannot
come
see
up.
even I cannot see even attempt. Again, quickest solution is if he can speak through your machine. I mean, if it's possible, just
Yeah, he's
maybe
going
it
to
makes
try one
sense
more
to do.
time, and then if he can't connect it in his place, he'll come up and use mine.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Thank you so much.
Yep.
It's nice
Yeah,
you are on. It's nice you are his neighbor.
Okay, Andre, we're trying to connect through my computer.
Mm-hmm.
Recording in progress.
Ooh.
Yeah. When you have multiple.
Oh, we can see you guys.
All right.
Excellent, Craig. Sit down.
Let's see if this works better. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on.
Well, that's Ariman playing tricks with
What
us,
is it?
so,
Yes.
but we are patient enough.
All right, very good. So let's keep trying. Where was I? December 27th. Oh, the polarity of John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. And then John is also thought to be very pure, never married, never involved with relationships, anything like that, always traveling, always bringing the word. And there are actually a couple of almost amusing anecdotes about him, that he had refused to sacrifice to the gods and was in Rome, taken out in front of the gates to a pot of boiling oil, thrown into the boiling oil, and nothing happened. He was not injured, no pain, nothing. And this had the Kaiser make the wonderful decision to send him to Patmos, to the island, to ban him to the island of Patmos, where of course, the Kaiser thought, if we put this man far away from civilization, then everything will be fine. He will shut him up and he won't be able to do anything to undermine the gods. But unfortunately for the Kaiser, John used this time in Patmos to, you might say, to go very deep within himself, or to reach very far out into the cosmos and to receive the revelation that we now call the Book of Revelation. So we could say the Kaiser did Christianity a big favor by banning John, by sending him off on his own, alone on this deserted island. It's not very big. I haven't been there myself. Maybe someone here in the group today has. And he was finally released from that island. But then again, he was back in Ephesus, which was his home base. And there he also refused to sacrifice to another goddess, Diana or Artemis. And for this, he was sentenced to death and was given the choice of, I believe, hanging, burning, or drinking poison. And he chose to drink the poison. And just before he was to take the cup with the poison, the executioner had two other people drink from it so that John would see how dangerous this was and realize he was really risking a lot by agreeing to drink this poison. And he saw that two others drank the poison and fell down dead. And then he made the sign of the cross above the cup, drank it empty, and just stood there and waited, and nothing happened. He's kept living and living and living. And then the executioner said, well, we don't really believe that unless these other two are brought back to life. So John took off his great cape, laid it over the two bodies, and sure enough, these two criminals who had been executed with the poisoned wine came back to life. For that reason, you often see John in paintings with, it's usually then a kind of a chalice, something that you would see on the altar of the Christian community or the Catholic Church, Episcopal Church, an actual chalice with a little snake coming out of it. And the snake symbolizing this evil poison that wants to kill John, but which John was able to subdue and actually take into himself. That's quite a picture there, that he not
Okay, it's again. So you are frozen. Break.
not only, he didn't throw the poison away. Another picture that's associated with John has some relationship to this snake. He's often seen as an eagle or as a scorpion. Snake, scorpion, something that crawls along the earth, or on the other hand, a being that flies very high. The eagle is even said to be able to look into the sun. And here we have another picture for John as this being who not only within himself comes to great realizations, but is able to be that direct contact with the Son being, the Christ, and not only to be in contact with that being, but also to bring into earthly words, into earthly pictures, what that being wants to communicate. Eagle, the eagle and the scorpion, the high-flying, deeply spiritual being, and at the same time, that being that is very much concretely on the earth. Also is one who, though he had his center in Ephesus, was one who traveled tirelessly, going to all of the little groups of people who had found the Christ, who wanted to hear more and more about him, who not only wanted to hear about him, but wanted to experience the Christ, so that John was one of the last eyewitnesses of the Christ's life, who could still travel about and tell about him. Yeah, cooking oil. I mean, the things he survived are almost worth a story in itself. Yeah. And then the Gospels themselves. So John begins his Gospel with the words I mentioned at the beginning, this meditation formula, this way of entering into the depths of one's own soul. And then, interestingly enough, the next being that pops up very soon is John, who we now call the baptizer or the Baptist. Already in the 6th verse of the Gospel of John, we hear there came a human being into existence, sent by God, his name, John. And there we have what we might say the representative of the we are as it had come into being in the eons before the appearance of Christ on the earth. Representative of that dynamic of humanity that was where everyone was intimately connected with each other. We're not only mother, father, children in the what we would now call the nuclear family, or the grandmother or the aunt, but everyone who was of similar descent as you, who lived in the same village, who drank the water out of the same river and drank the milk from the same cows, that all of these life forces that you share in common with each other, along with the spirit, the local spirit of your place that binds you together as members of a particular village in this stretch of the desert in Syria, or this village in the mountains of Greece, wherever it might be, this we are was very strong. And anything outside of your own we was already quite suspicious. So we have to go back perhaps no farther than Abraham to come to a person who began to receive, let's call them revelations from spiritual beings that were very much directed to his own mission of beginning a line of human beings, which would, as he was told, be as numerous as the stars in the heavens and the sands on the shores of the sea, and where finally the salvation of his people would come forth. And Abraham would be another long story, had a son. He almost sacrificed that son, but was held back at the very last moment. And this son went on to father a son, and that son, another son, and so on through many generations. You can read about this in the 1st chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew. And as this line proceeded, the human beings who were born again and again came closer and more intimately connected with the life on earth. Earthlier as well, and at the same time more individual, where we run into someone like Moses, who as all by himself ascended a mountaintop and perceived in the burning bush the voice, the being that says, I am the I am. In a moment of history, when out of this great sea of the we are, of the men, people all connected with each other, much less independent than we can even imagine probably, one voice stands out, I am the I am. And Moses takes this deep into himself. Later, he brings the so-called 10 Commandments to the people, which help form and shape the Hebrew people in their further development. And it is here that this life forces begin to form the outer vessel for this people. And the individual people who join together and produce a son who produces another son, produce the living representatives of this great we are, of this great vessel of the Hebrew people preparing again and again for the birth of the Messiah. Until John, the baptizer, arises, and you can read about his genesis in the first chapter of the Gospel of Luke, and he appears again and again in the various Gospels. And I just want to pull out one scene that I think is very crucial, where we see how this last representative of the old way of being, of the old school, you might say, of the old society, becomes the one who hands the reins over to the new representative. If you look in your Bible in the first chapter of the Gospel of John, from the 19th verse on, we have a couple of scenes where John the baptizer is standing by the waters of the Jordan and sees Jesus of Nazareth walking by, this man whom he has already baptized. And he gestures to two of his disciples, gestures to Jesus, and these two disciples begin to follow Jesus. Jesus turns around, looks at them and says, "What are you looking for?" And they don't know quite what to say, and he simply tells them to follow him, and they stay with him the whole day. There's no record of what they talked about, but it was significant enough that one of these disciples, who is then actually named Andrew, goes and finds his brother, Simon Peter. Simon Peter goes and finds Philip, and Philip goes and finds Nathanael. Interestingly enough, the other disciple who first followed Jesus is unnamed. That can give us a little puzzle. The other disciple. We don't know who it was. Wild speculation might lead me to think, could that have been someone who finally enters into the circle of Jesus as the one beloved? I don't know. It's tempting to think that. And this John the Baptist hands over his own disciples, those students of his who had begun to follow his path, which was very strict and very ascetic. And at the right moment, he sees Jesus walking and indicates, there is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And they follow him and they stay with him. And these disciples stayed with Jesus until the very end. Then we have a very interesting scene right after that, where the mother of Jesus appears for the first. And again, it's fascinating to notice that the mother of Jesus is not named by name, but we have this being who comes in her function as the mother of Jesus, We might again say the representative of all that has been up until then. That's what we parents do, huh? We represent the past to our children and hopefully a bit of the future, but our main task is we have brought these children into the world. We form an important part of their past, and we have a function. I am the father of my children to a certain extent. I'm also who I am. I have my other things to do, but that is a particular representation of what has been. And so this mother of Jesus is present at a wedding in Cana in Galilee, which immediately awakens many pictures. Galilee was a different place than Judea, for example, where Jerusalem is located. Cana was a city that was in the crossing place of many different cultures, so that we immediately have the idea things happen there that wouldn't happen in Jerusalem, that wouldn't happen in Rome necessarily, or not in Ephesus. Those places where different cultures meet each other and fructify each other. Cana was such a place. And there's a wedding taking place. A wedding, a place, a moment in time where two beings unite with each other to create a new future, where they come from their past and join together and create the future. And what happens there, they run out of wine. Again, a strong picture, a picture of a particular drink that has its own substance, its own flavor, is not water, it's wine. And what happens, water becomes wine. That which has been, which the servants have pumped out of the ground, have gotten into great vessels, transforms into something new with a very distinct character. We might say again, from this very great general, tasteless, aromaless, colorless substance of water, this new substance, colorful, tasteful, powerful, wine comes forth. The best that has been served at that wedding up until that point, by the way. Always good to remember that. And this mother of Jesus does not appear again in this gospel until the very end, when she stands with the beloved disciple under the cross. And now it's time to talk about this wonderful word, love. Rudolf Steiner tells us that in pre-Christian times, only those people could love each other, could enter into a marriage relationship, who were related by blood. So similar blood, married similar blood. You married within your tribe, within your village, within your region. You didn't marry someone that wasn't somehow related to you. The love forces traveled through the blood, he tells us, in pre-Christian times. And somehow this picture of the water becoming wine, of in Cana, in Galilee, a substance taking on a very individual flavor and color and texture, begins to tell me that this force of love, these forces of life, are now beginning to go, you might even say, their own way, to search their own path. A path, again, that might be a little dark, a little confusing, that takes a fair amount of effort to wander because it's not given by your family or your traditions, but you're seeking together with, let's say, a partner, or be it a business partner, be it a romantic partner. You're searching for the path ahead into the future. And this mother of Jesus then appears again at the end. But in between, this love that Jesus shows three people, as mentioned in chapter 11 of the book of John, the Gospel of John. There was one sick, his name was Lazarus, and he with his sisters were beloved of Jesus. Jesus loved them. And especially we Americans use that word so often that it almost means nothing. I'm sorry to say. I love hot chocolate, or I love Gina's cap that she's wearing right now, and so on and so forth. The word has been hopelessly trivialized. So let's make an effort right now to pull back something of that love, which you might say allows me to feel the other in myself and to experience myself in the other. Sounds a little abstract, but if you practice it, it gets real. And I wonder often if I apply this description, which is given by Rudolf Steiner, I didn't make it up myself. When I think of the great teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, the bearer of the Christ, looking at 3 of his students and loving them, he sees himself in each of them. He sees his cosmic being and his cosmic becoming at work in these 3 people, in Lazarus, in Mary, and Martha. And he puzzles them by not showing up because Lazarus appears to be ill. And you would think he loves Lazarus. Well, why doesn't he go heal him from his illness? But no, he stays exactly where he was, about a day's journey away. And when he finally does come, everyone thinks Lazarus has died. He's been laid in a tomb. They've rolled a heavy stone into the entrance of the tomb, and they are mourning in their home at the grave. Bethany is one big mourning society. And Jesus does not allow himself to be distracted by any of this, looks at Martha and says, "You know, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will not perish." These again are words that perhaps some of us have heard so often and sort of repeat them in our sleep. But if you let them kind of ripen on your tongue and begin to exude their real aroma and their real flavor, whoever believes in me shall not die, but will have life into the ages of ages. What could that mean for an individual like you and me? He says that to Martha and then proceeds to call Lazarus to himself. One of the possibilities of translating these words, often said, come out, come into appearance, come forth. Here are many different translations. And Lazarus comes forth. From that moment on, no Lazarus appears. No Lazarus is named in the Gospel of John, but only the disciple whom Jesus loved, a couple of times, not excessively. Until the very end of the Gospel of John, we hear that this writer is the one who was witness to all of these things and who has written them all down. And we might say at that point, Jesus has done something more revolutionary than anything else he has done. He has initiated a human being into what we would now call a Christian path, a path of following Jesus, not only as he wanders through Israel and teaches and preaches and heals, but as he goes through death itself. Lazarus, says Jesus, he has died, and I will go to him. And he goes to him and brings him out of the tomb. And these are things that we really only know through Rudolf Steiner. Brings him into contact with that very representative of the old stream, John the Baptizer. It's only a couple of times that Rudolf Steiner speaks about this, where he says that the being of John the Baptizer had been with the circle of disciples ever since his death. Since his spirit had been liberated from his physical body, he was able to freely connect himself with the circle of disciples and, as it were, to become a kind of a group spirit, as a guide to the disciples as an inspiration. And at the awakening of Lazarus, or at the initiation of Lazarus, the being of John the Baptist descended into the being of John, or of Lazarus, the beloved disciple, so that he was very concretely working with him from the spirit world and inspiring the further paths of Lazarus, John, Evangelist. And this is really an important moment where we see how this old path, in the full potential of its being and its becoming, joins the representative of the new path. We might say Lazarus was the last of the old initiation and the first Christian initiation, and then proceeds to author that gospel, which Rudolf Steiner calls a path to Christian initiation, the Gospel of John. So that the old comes into the new, joins with it, in a way reflecting those words of the John prologue, when we hear that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, or dwelt within us. The old path has become part of the new path. So we can never really have future without the past, but it only takes place in the present. That's another one. And then there's the moment after the washing of the feet, when Jesus reveals that one of his disciples will betray him. And just imagine the scene. He has blessed the bread and given it to the disciples. He's blessed the wine and passed the cup around so that each of them receives a small portion of this blessed substance. They are in the presence of their beloved teacher. He is in the presence of his much-loved disciples. Just try to imagine that atmosphere, not really aware of the threat that's coming toward them from the outside world. And then he says, one of you will betray me. Who, me? One is, of course, tempted to point the finger at anyone but oneself. And then it is Peter, the great initiative person, who speaks to the beloved disciple, the one resting his ear on the heart of Jesus, and asks him, find out who that is. Such a typical human thing to do. You're closest, you ask him. We used to do that as fifth graders. We say, you go ask the teacher if we can go home early. I don't think I could do that. But this is an amazing moment when he asks, and Jesus simply says, the one whom I give the morsel, that will be the one. He gives the morsel to Judas, and Judas leaves the circle. The circle of disciples from that moment is broken open. It's important to remember. There is a break in the integrity of the circle of disciples from that moment. And then I jump ahead to one last scene, so I don't talk too long. Jesus is led away from the Garden of Gethsemane, and two disciples follow him, Peter and an other disciple, a disciple who was well known to the scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees. Again, an other disciple, an unnamed human being, written down by the author of the Gospel of John. And this particular other disciple was well known. This could suggest a connection to Lazarus, who was not just some poor guy living out in the country, but was a very wealthy human being, would have been part of perhaps the inner circle of the wealthy and powerful. Again, simply a puzzle, one of those many puzzles that has occupied theologians and created dissertations and master's theses for the last 2,000 years. I can't solve that puzzle today either, but it's good always to remember there are puzzling moments in the gospel. It's not all crystal clear. And this disciple appears again then under the cross, where we might say Christ looks down, and of the few words that are recorded that he spoke from the cross, he looks to his mother and says, "Mother, behold your son," and looks at the beloved disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that moment, the disciple took her into his own. And here we have, I think, another one of these very important beginnings where something from the past, a kind of a finest fruit of the development of the people up until that time, the mother of Jesus, the one who was deemed worthy by the world of spirit to bear one of these children we call Jesus, is taken into the being of that other disciple, that beloved disciple, the one whom Jesus initiated himself. Excuse me. And these two beings become, we might say, become one. John literally takes the mother of Jesus into his own world, in that at some point they travel together to Ephesus, which is now called Ephes, I believe, in the western part of Turkey. And they live there. John travels, as we mentioned earlier, a great deal. Of course, he goes to Rome at some point. He lives on Patmos. But his home, the center of his activity, of his life, is this place in Ephesus, which has always been a holy spot, a place of veneration of divine beings and half-divine beings. So that this, again, this is one of those places where what the old we are, all of the development of humanity up until that point, from the great collective becoming more and more individual, more and more ego-centered in the good way, and sometimes in very difficult ways, ego-centered, so that the great ego itself, the Christ, the Logos, the Word, could be born into that stream of life and become part of it and become its leader and inspirer. And in that sense, that's what I want to say about John, the Evangelist, in celebration of his, how manyth death day? Let's see, 1900 years or so. And to have given a little bit of an insight into the old and its metamorphosis into the new. And perhaps the one or the other of you find some inspiration in what you want to do yourself. So, Andre, I hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Craig, for your wonderful lecture. So, dear friends, I don't think we need a break. So if you need a break, just let me know right now. So we can take maybe 2 minutes to stretch our legs or use facilities or have a sip of water. Okay, so nobody's saying anything. So, and we're moving into questions and answers section. So if you navigate your cursor, your arrow in the bottom of your screen, so you can see reactions and click on it. So, and lowest but biggest button, it will be raise hand. So this is how we're going to proceed. So if you're clicking, so I will see your raise hand and you will ask your question. Okay, so floor is open. So don't be shy.
I was going to say Helena Burkhardt has a question.
Okay, Helena. Yes, I can see it. Unmute your machine, please. Unmute first. Excellent.
Greg, could you please repeat again? In Lazarus were then two other beings, the way I understood, but please, I need to be corrected. And these were John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. Did I get this right, or please use?
Yes, I made a distinction between those. Those are two very distinct human beings back in the day. The one who started out as Lazarus and who through his initiation became the beloved disciple, whom we call John, who wrote the Gospel of John, the book of Revelation, and the letters. And then there was John the Baptist, or as I like to call him, the baptizer, who lived before, who was born around the same time as Jesus Christ, and who had a very different path. His path was much more in the desert, alone, and only came into being noticed when he appeared just before Jesus to baptize. So those are two very different beings who do unite at the initiation of Lazarus. So it's not simple, takes a few years. We'll get there.
And thank you so much. So they were united with the soul and the spirit of Lazarus.
Correct. And becomes part of his inspiration.
Yeah. And how does now Christian Rosenkreuz come into this picture?
That's a good question that I would love to leave to the Christian Rosenkreuz experts. I think there's a few of those in our crowd, maybe not today, I don't know. I have to admit that's one of the figures I haven't occupied myself with a great deal, Helena. So anything I say would be kind of misty. I bet there's someone else coming soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Helena and Craig. Yeah, just a little piece of knowledge. So it's a previous incarnation of Lazarus is Hiram Aviv, the builder of Jerusalem temple. But future incarnation of Lazarus is Christian Rosenkreuz. So it connects to reincarnation. This is the same individuality.
There you go. See, Andre had the simple answer. I was making it much too complicated. Thank you.
And I cannot expand it, unfortunately, but Andrew Linnell on January 3rd will give us lecture about Hiram Aviv, which is closely related to Lazarus, because this is same individuality.
Yeah.
And Christian Rosenkreuz.
Andre, what you just said, I have difficulties with my hearing aids. Can you repeat once more how Christian Rosenkreuz is connected then with Lazarus? Can you repeat once more what you said?
Lazarus, in his next incarnation, will be born as Christian Rosenkreuz. So this is practically same individuality. Hiram Aviv, and then he was reincarnated as Lazarus, and in the future, regarding to Lazarus incarnation, it will be Christian Rosenkreuz.
Together then with John the Baptist and John the Evangelist? Yeah,
It's the same individuality. Unfortunately, cannot say reference of Steiner, but I remember it.
That would probably be in those lectures about the temple legend, I suspect.
Could be, yeah.
I see that Ken Simpson has a question about the lecture I quoted at the beginning. Since I have moved up to Gina's apartment, I'm going to run and get the book so I can tell you exactly what that was. But if someone else has a question, you can start thinking about it. I'll be back in 47 seconds.
So then when Lazarus was brought back to life, at that moment, John the Baptist, John the Evangelist, and Christian Rosenkreuz shared his soul and spirit.
Helena, as I understand, Lazarus was raised and initiated by Christ.
Yeah.
And his initiation name became John.
Oh, okay.
So this is same individuality in one incarnation. So first he started his life as Lazarus, and he died, and then he was raised by Christ, and he took name John after his initiation. This is same individuality. And of course, later he became John Evangelist.
So here's a reference for Ken Simpson or for anyone else who wants to look this up. The word, some of it I quoted, some of it I paraphrased, was from a lecture by Rudolf Steiner in Berlin on February 19th, 1906. And I found it in the Collected Works 94. I'm not always sure if the English translations exactly correspond with the German originals. I haven't looked that up, but knowing Ken, he's probably already checked it out, or has he left?
And that is in the book, The Temple Legend.
You will find a lot more of the things that Andre was talking about in those lectures, the temple legend. That's also somewhere in the 90s, the 93, 93A, something like that.
Oh. And what you told me, I find in the lecture February 19, 1906.
Yes. Those are just some very general comments about the Gospel of John and about John himself.
Okay.
Very simple, inspiring.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Helena. So, dear friends, more questions?
I see a lot of avatars. I think maybe many people are recording this session to listen later. Don't see too many people appearing on their screens.
Oh, finally. Okay, Travis, thank you for raised hand. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to, I don't really have a question, but I just appreciate your comments and your presentation, Craig. For some reason, which I've been sick since Friday, I've had this terrible, so I've been in this altered state of mind and going through the holy nights. But whenever you started sharing, I just started crying, and I've had tears flowing down this entire lecture, and I'm not sure what it's about. I'm not typically an emotional type of individual, but something is opened up, and I just want to thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. The last thing I want to do is make someone cry, but if it has a healthy effect, then so be it.
Yeah, it's a good thing. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, dear friends, more questions to Craig?
Anyone else crying? I mean, need a tissue? You don't want to? No, I'm glad. I think that's the first time I've ever had that comment in any talk I've given.
Hmm.
Certainly online, where it's a whole different dynamic.
Hmm.
Helena has one more. Yeah.
Okay. Helena, please unmute your machine, please. Unmute it. Uh-huh. Excellent.
I am sure there is a reason that at the wedding of Cana, the mother of Jesus was just called Mother of Jesus and not Mary. Can you say something about it?
I think I did, but maybe I can see if I
Oh,
can repeat
yeah.
that. So she's there as a, this sounds very dry to say it this way, but she's there in function. She's not there as a personal, as herself, so to speak, but she comes in the function, Mother of Jesus. Just like you have a mother, I have a mother. I don't call my mother Rachel. That would be much too personal. I call, my mother's been dead for years, but I called her mother. I addressed her, so to speak, in her office as my mother. And when the mother of Jesus appears in a public function like a wedding, interesting enough, Jesus is named by name and no one else. The mother of Jesus, the disciples were present, the master of ceremonies, the bridegroom. No names are named. Everyone is there as their function, which gives anything they have to say or do, gives a much more objective quality than if it were, oh, Mary said this or Mary did that. No, the mother of Jesus. It's a fine distinction. It takes a little mental exercise to get there.
Thank you. I appreciate your explanation.
Attempt anyway.
Yeah. I called my mother mother too, and not her name.
Right.
Uh,
Signifies a different relationship to the person.
mhm. Thank you. Quite interesting. Yeah.
I don't see anything else in the chat. Couple of thank yous. Those, you're welcome. Always lovely to see my colleague Lisa Devine present at one of these talks. And then to sit across the table from another colleague who generously loans me her internet. So the show can go.
Here is raised hand from Travis again. Travis.
Yes. Well, I did have a question, Craig.
Oh.
Thinking about the comment, the mother of Jesus. We've been studying the Incredible Births of Jesus by Edward Smith. And so I'm thinking that may have something to do with that phraseology too, you think? Because I'm studying this, and I'm sure there are those in the group that probably know this better than I do, but that the Luke Jesus and the Matthew Jesus, they both had moms, and one had died, and Joseph had taken the one as his wife. So there was really, from a genetic standpoint, we don't know if that was actually Jesus's mother. Isn't that correct? Or could you address that perhaps? So.
Yeah, it was his mother, but it is a complicated question that would probably go too far to try to figure out here. But I think it's also, it could be a reason that you're pointing out that he has a different relationship to this woman. Really, it is his mother. He addresses her, I forgot this earlier, he addresses her in Cana and from the cross in exactly the same way. He begins, woman, see your son. And in Cana, when she makes him aware of the fact that they have no wine, he poses this question, woman, what, you and me? That's the literal Greek. It, of course, doesn't make any sense in our, we have to say something like, what is between you and me? Woman. So again, an even more general way of speaking to her. So it's very much the objective function that the person has at that moment that is working, and not the personal relationship.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Travis and Craig. Okay, dear friends, I think we're working already 1 hour and 20 minutes, and maybe it's good time to round our session. And thank Craig for his wonderful presentation. And yes, please join us for 29th for Mary Stuart Adams, and please have greatest experiences during Holy Night season. Thank you so much. Please feel free, unmute your machine and say a word of thank you to Craig.
Thank you,
want.
Greg.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Craig.
You're very welcome. My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Glad
New Year,
to do it.
everyone.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you, everyone that came.
And
Thank you,
Andre.
Carola. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Craig,
you.
and thank you, Andre, for arranging all these wonderful presentations.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Thank-
second that.
Thank
Yes,
you,
I
Helena.
second
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, so have a great afternoon, friends, and
Take
goodbye.
care.
Bye.
Happy Holy Nights.
Mhm.
All right.